All right, my friends, we are back. Merry Christmas. I hope you all had a great Christmas time. David as well. I hope you did as well.
Thank you. It was great. Great to be back, Gene. Great to see everybody. Happy New
It's
Year.
great. Yeah, likewise. It's great to have you back, Mr. David Frangioni. But before we started, I just wanted to show you that I'm wearing a shirt from one of the best, if not the best, progressive rock groups of all time. Part of a Christmas gift. As you can see, Genesis.
Yeah,
Yep.
love it. My friend Phil. Beautiful.
Love the band. I wish they had Genesis music in Atmos, and maybe perhaps one day you can work on that, or maybe you already are, and we just don't know it.
I think, over time, everything's going to be in Atmos. Just going to take time.
Well, I do have the Genesis, a bunch of their older albums from like Trick of the Tail, Wind and Weatherin', Duke, and Abacab. I have those all in SACD 5.1, and I use the Dolby Up mixer. So
Nice.
basically, they sound pretty damn good. So if anybody is a Genesis fan, there are 5.1 recordings of most of their catalog. They're kind of hard to find now, and they're kind of expensive. But if you can get your hands on them, throw them through the Dolby Up mixer, and you'll be in good shape.
You have them in DSD?
Yeah.
Nice. Great. Yep. I haven't heard those. That's awesome.
They're a little bit bright, but when you get the bass level set right and you've got the immersive up mix going on, it actually sounds really good, especially a song like
those records, Gene, those records were a little bright, so that's kind of accurate to, when I've heard the audiophile 2-channel versions of them, they, that's kind of their sound. So it's in higher res, you're going to get even more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the music from that era, unfortunately, just wasn't recorded like the stuff we're doing today. So, but I wanted to, for those that aren't familiar with David Frangioni by now, because you've only been on our channel a few times, I wanted to give a quick presentation on who you are, what you do. I'm going to share the screen here with the slide presentation and put us in the background here. David Frangioni. So who are you, David? Let's take a look here. If you want to kind of narrate what we're showing.
I'll narrate that. This is the autobiography version. Yep. Okay, so 2 years old, was diagnosed with eye cancer, retinoblastoma, just cancer of the eye. And they had to remove my right eye, so I've been blind in my right eye ever since, which I think heightened my senses, in my hearing and otherwise.
Oh, wow, good point.
And then somehow the drums found me, and I've been playing literally my whole life, and started from scratch. We had no money, no connections. My dad was a meat cutter, and my mom was a legal secretary from Boston, and we had a great family and a lot of love and support, but had to just kind of start from zero and, go from there.
I got to ask you one question about the meat cutting. Since your dad was a butcher and he had these big carcasses of meat, did you go and punch them like you did in Rocky 1? Were you motivated to do that?
No, I was motivated in many ways, but I think he cut the meat too small for me to do that. I never saw any hanging. It's probably a good thing as an Italian family that I didn't see any meat hanging in the basement. But he did have a freezer full of meat, and it was locked, as a matter of fact, and he was the only one with the key. So another Frangioni mystery.
Awesome.
And then Pro Tools. So I caught the Pro Tools bug before it was Pro Tools. At the time, it was Sound Designer, which was a 2-channel sample editing software package, which at the beginning, they made one, DigiDesign, as they were called then. Later on, they sold to Avid, as we know them today. But at the time, it was DigiDesign. Evan Brooks and Peter Gotcher were the founders. And I got working with them, and they used to make Sound Designer, and you'd have to buy a version for each sampler that you own. So one for the Mirage, one for the Emu, one for the Akai, and so on. And then eventually it became universal, and you could buy one copy of Sound Designer, and it worked with all of your samplers. And then it evolved to Sound Tools, which was similar piece of software, but it used hardware as well to record 2 channels to hard disk.
Mm-hmm.
That was the beginning, and we never looked back. Excuse me. And and it evolved to Pro Tools, and here we are.
Gotcha.
Along the way, I've amassed pretty extensive clientele over the years, and these are some of the people that have trusted me to collaborate.
Yeah, you did a book on Clint Eastwood, basically.
Two of them.
Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
two.
Clint Eastwood icon. For those who who are Clint Eastwood fans, go to Amazon, check out Clint Eastwood icon. I also want to add that Modern Drummer, the world's #1 drum brand, has a festival going on virtually right now that you can go and for $12.99 watch it as much as you want for a year, and it's absolutely incredible. And anybody who's into drums, check out moderndrummer.com and check out the festival. You'll love it.
So all the videos on moderndrummer.com, or is it through a paywall on a YouTube?
No, it's through a paywall, and so you buy the festival, and then you can watch it as many times as you want on demand.
Sweet.
Uses Vimeo in the back end, very easy.
Gotcha.
But it's all done through moderndrummer.com, and it's an actual festival, an actual show. This is our 21st festival, Gene. Our second one virtually because of the pandemic. Then we had 19 in person previously. Virtually every drummer you've ever heard of has performed at our festivals over the years, and this one's incredible, hosted by Stuart Copeland, and it's pretty awesome.
Oh wow! So Stuart Copeland being the drummer from the Police. If anyone doesn't, yeah. Wow, that's some pretty big name right there. That's cool.
Well, there's lots more of them. Worked with Ozzy for a while. Appeared on 2 seasons of the Osbournes. Incredible experience. You imagine we could be here. We could do a podcast just on that.
Oh, I imagine.
And then going on, probably the majority of my career has been with Aerosmith. That was one of the first big projects I worked on, and I kind of stayed in the fray with them. So I've had the privilege of working on a lot of projects with those guys.
I haven't checked in Apple Music or on Tidal. Is there Aerosmith music in Atmos?
Not yet. It's coming.
Okay.
And then of course, there's your compliment. Thank you very much. The Renaissance man, because I've done a lot of different things. I love all aspects of it. I love creating sound, listening to sound, creating environments that are a big part of how to get world-class sound. Mm-hmm. And it's all been different aspects of my career. My third book, Crash, World's Greatest Drum Kits. If you love drums, this is a great book.
Speaking of which, you own that kit that's on that cover. That's called Palmer's Steel Kit.
Yeah, that's a dream kit. That's another podcast we have to do. I'm sorry, everybody, for stacking future podcasts up, but I can't help it. The stories are so interesting, and it's not because I have anything to do with me. I happen to be in them and can tell them with great detail, but it's really the story itself and just how you can take dreams and a vision and just manifest. And that drum kit is another example of that.
Cool.
And of course, we talked about Modern Drummer. And I'm a lifetime student and practitioner of great sound and audio and the environments that we have to create them.
And now circle back to what you're doing today is you're basically making immersive audio or spatial audio mixes that some of the stuff that we're listening to on Apple Music and Tidal, right?
That's right. And Amazon.
Amazon, yeah, true.
Yeah. And so, I love it. I've been mixing surround for over 25 years. It was 5.1, of course, at first. I've been listening to it and setting it up when it was, even prior to that, Dolby Pro Logic 2. But mixing wise, I started with 5.1. And now, of course, we have immersive audio. And, what you've asked me to talk about today is kind of the keep it high level, because I want to just preface by saying you can really get into the weeds and geek out, because there's so many layers to everything we're going to talk about tonight that, it'll get overwhelming, and that's not the purpose here. I want people to come away with some things that they really can grasp and take into their, listening experiences. So we're going to keep it, I'm going to purposely keep it as general as I can to just get the points across, and take you through the process as you've asked me to, Gene, of, where does the mix start, and then how does it evolve? How do we hear it? And then where does it, end up? And then what can we do in each of our listening environments?
Mm-hmm.
Most likely a home theater, let's say, or a media room that has a surround processor of some kind, whether it's a dedicated processor or receiver or sound bar, as long as it can decode Atmos, that's what we're referring to. And that's kind of the end zone. So those are the steps that we'll go through.
Right. And it's important to know for beginners that if you want to take full advantage of these kind of recordings, you do need to have height channels. If you just have a 5.1 system, all of that information is going to be folded back into those 5 channels. You're not going to get that spatial sound.
Yeah, exactly. So, as we just kind of talk about immersive, it's 3D audio, right? So that's how we're breaking past the stereo width that you can create inside of 2 speakers in traditional stereo. Is now it's 3-dimensional, and all of the speakers and the way that the sound is mixed is what creates that sound field, and using objects, which is what made Atmos so special and unique, is breaking through discrete locations of placing sound. Now objects can you can place anywhere in within the available sound field, which is 360 degrees. So it's a real evolution. So basically, if we start at the beginning, when you go to mix, so this is for everybody. This isn't just my workflow. Again, I'm keeping this high level, broad strokes, so people understand when they finish this discussion we're having, kind of how the workflow is for just all mixes, right? And there's a million variations within, but this is kind of the core principles. So when you start to do a mix for immersive, you have one of these or a combination of these, what we'll call assets, right? So either a multi-track, which is what the song was recorded on originally, each track individual. So track 1, bass drum, track 2, snare drum, and so on. Or if the multi-track can't be found, because remember, there's a lot of recordings out there that the library of the recordings doesn't exist anymore of the actual multi-tracks. And if that's the case, then maybe we'll have stems, which are submixes essentially of the different groups of tracks. So like a drum stem would be a stereo, typically stereo, mixed down set of the drums. And then like bass guitar stem there's your bass guitar, your vocal, background vocal stem, all the background vocals. So rather than have everything individually as it was recorded, these are kind of subgrouped into what's called stems. And then if that doesn't exist, then the last resort is to take the stereo mix that we all know and go through proprietary, it's essentially upmixing, but it's a lot more sophisticated than the upmixer that we're going to discuss later that you get in a surround processor and receiver, et cetera. It's, there's a lot more to it. You can move things around. It's a very deliberate, defined process. And every mixing engineer has their own way of doing it. There isn't one way that you just, take stereo and create immersive from it. Everybody does it differently, but that's kind of the worst case scenario. But you still get a great sounding mix as opposed to not having anything in immersive, because if all that exists is a stereo file, that's your only chance, or otherwise just stick with stereo.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the really old recordings. Like I listened to some of the Beatles Atmos and they sound freaking awesome. I mean, there's discrete stuff going on.
They have the multi-tracks.
Oh, kind of like what George, what's his name? George Martin. George Martin did that with the DVD audio with Cirque du Soleil, right? With the Love disc.
Well, yeah, Giles Martin, his son. And maybe at the time for Love, George was with him before he passed. They might have done that together. I don't recall, but I know Giles has been he's been the guy that's taken the ball on all of these immersive audio mixes for the Beatles catalog. And they have now granted, a lot of those records were only done with 4 or 8 tracks. So you didn't have a lot of multi-tracks, but it at least had the multi-track. So that's why you can get it to sound a lot better.
I heard that they took stuff that wasn't in the original recordings but was recorded at the time, and then they added that back in for the DVD audio mixes, and maybe they just expanded on that for Atmos.
Amazing. Yeah, that would be incredible. I'm a huge fan of what the Beatles did. I worked with Ringo a while back, which was an incredible honor. And thank you, Universal, for continuing to put out these amazing box sets and all of the immersive that they've done with Giles and the Beatles and George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, and just been awesome. It's a great time to be a fan, isn't it, Gene?
It really is, man. I mean, this whole Atmos music stuff has revolutionized how we're listening to music in the last 6 months. That's how quick this happened, like overnight.
And it's the beginning. It's just the beginning. So in the studio world, this is what we get to start with. And so that's what we get. That's what we get delivered to us, let's say. And then that mix that we create from these assets that we just mentioned, you basically do typically, right? This is the typical way. Remember, there's an exception for every rule in music production. So we're not going to cover any of those. We're just going to talk the typical way. You do a mix and it goes into the Dolby renderer, and that one mix that you're feeding into the renderer comes out with these different versions that we're looking at on the screen. So you get your Atmos, we'll call it 1-to-1 mix, your multi-speaker mix. That would be the original, full-on mix. Then you also, from there, the renderer will derive a 5.1. It'll basically derive whatever you ask it to. We'll get to it in a second in another slide, but it's a very capable and crucial part to how the mix process works with Immersive. And of course, you create a binaural as well. And so when you're mixing, you're kind of going back and forth, listening to all these different versions so you can balance what's going to sound best on all of them.
So a stupid question for you. If you're putting this through a renderer and it's creating what you said is the Atmos multi-speaker playback, does it decide where those objects go, or do you have control over that? If you want to put, if you want to have
no, I decide.
You decide. Okay.
Yeah. The mixer decides. So the renderer is just creating the metadata based on what what I'm mixing, right? That's how you capture it and then get it to play back exactly the way that you mixed it on a true Atmos mix. So if I mix it, if you play back Atmos with all the speakers like you can in your theater, for instance, you're hearing the mix the way that I mixed it or whoever mixed it into the renderer and then back out, because it's Dolby. Remember, Dolby's controlling for most of the listening that you're doing. All of the listening of true Atmos, encode, decode. They have the renderer, which is encoding it, and then they have the same technology on the decode side. So it's very predictable.
Right. Do you do a lot of wide? Do you do a lot of wide? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to just add, we'll get to in a slide, is where it can get a little bit less predictable is in the binaural, which we'll cover in a second.
What I was going to ask you is, because I have a bunch of Atmos mixes, music mixes that I've been listening to, and I've been kind of looking at the objects being panned around with the Storm audio processor. I'm surprised to see how many of these mixes are using wide channels. Are you using wide channels in a lot of your mixes?
Well, I'm using them as objects. I'm not using them as dedicated channels because I'm mixing through 714. I'm not mixing through 914. So I don't have the wide set up. I have them in my theater, but I don't have them in the studio. There just isn't enough need for it in the studio world right now. For music, for movies there is, but for music, I can get the same effect of how I want things to sound and where I want them placed without having the discrete channels.
Gotcha. So someone's asking, this is an interesting question, maybe you can answer real quick. Does the mixer have the ability to force the audio to a specific channel rather than objects?
Yes. Yep, you can do either.
Okay. And then one more question I wanted to show here, and I've noticed this as well. Oh, that's the wrong question, but that's a good one. I think we answered that. So if you don't have height channels, then those objects will be remixed back into 5.1, or just won't even play that layer at all, right?
Well, they'll get folded down.
Right.
Yeah.
There was another one.
Processor.
There was another one. Oh, here it is. I noticed this too. Like I was listening to that yellow Atmos mix, and it's great, but a lot of the Atmos mixes do have the bass levels turned up. Do you think that's deliberate, or do you think that's just something that is a growing pain like we had when DTS first started doing 5.1 CDs and they were cranking
you had the -10 LFE and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember it well. I think it's probably a combination of both. I mean, the Apple TV, and we'll get to this in a slide. So, Carl, that's actually a great question. Apple TV to a processor is full Atmos the way it was mixed. So maybe that mix, was mixed with a lot of bass, and it could have been because the mixer, wasn't hearing all the bass in their room, and so they overcompensated for it. There's so many places that bass can get exaggerated all the way into the processor itself. I think it's a combination of both. I don't think it's just technology growing pains like the DTS -10 thing was. I also think it's mixing growing pains where, everybody's doing it a little bit different. Everybody has a different vision. And that's, that's the beauty of the creative process, right?
Yeah. And
so
we'll talk about settings that we can help with that as well later on in this presentation.
Yep, exactly, which we'll get to. So I'll just blast through this a little bit. So you have your streaming service, reads there's the Dolby renderer, as we say here at the top, and it's basically I need to hear what the different outputs are going to sound like, right? Because we're not just mixing Dolby Atmos for everybody to hear in Dolby Atmos, because most people don't have 7, 10, 12, 13, 14 speakers. Most people have headphones or soundbar. And so I've got to hear what all the fold downs are going to sound like, essentially. And I can do that with the renderer. It will output in real time these different formats. And then I can, as I said, since we're creating only one mix, I'm balancing and I'm making changes to the Atmos mix to make the 5.1 sound better, and then binaural and 7.1, etc., and kind of find the best balance for all of them so that they sound great. And then you want to listen to binaural and you want to hear what is it going to sound like. And then we have all these formats that get basically there's two behind the scenes file formats that get decoded, we'll say. And the renderer that is the Dolby renderer and the Apple Music renderer for binaural on headphones is different. So right now, as we stand, when I'm mixing and I'm listening to binaural, the binaural that the Dolby renderer is playing for me is what you'll get when you listen on Tidal or Amazon in binaural. But for Apple, what I do is I create an MP4, which the renderer can do. And of course, it's not real time. It has to write the file, but no big deal. And it writes the file, and then I can listen to it on my iPhone and, iPad, Blu-ray player, wherever, and really get a sense of how it's going to play back, because Apple, they use their own renderer unless you go through an Apple TV. If you go through an Apple TV, it's the Dolby Atmos, file that you're listening back. But for all of what most people will hear will be through a mobile device of some kind, and that uses the Apple's spatial audio engine, right, as we all know it to be called, and that's their own version of the of binaural. And that's a perfect place where we're talking about growing pains. So will Apple adopt the Dolby binaural? I don't know, but right now there's kind of two binaural formats, Apple's and Dolby's. The challenge with the Apple format, and it's not a big challenge because you can work around it as I described, is that it's not real time like the Dolby one. But that, I think, again, this is so new and it's growing so fast that all of this will get worked out. So this is just kind of a snapshot of what it's like in this moment. But like everything, when I was around for the 5.1 and the 7.1 and DVDA and SACD, and remember when SACD launched DSD, it was only 2-channel, then it went to 5.1, and it all evolved. So we're just taking a snapshot for the sake of education and discussion of this right now, but it will, it'll keep just evolving. And which
so how come we don't hear a lot about binaural? I mean, we hear everything about spatial audio, but I mean, are we to assume that
spatial audio is binaural?
Yeah, for the headphones, right?
Right.
But they never call it binaural. They just call it spatial audio. I think there's still a confusion with nomenclature, because I think of binaural as those demos that you put on, like on YouTube, like the barbershop, and you hear things in your head all around you. You don't necessarily get that with the Atmos spatial audio music. It's not that in your face.
Well, yeah, it's spatial audio is a heck of a lot more accessible and in a marketing sense, and it's so descriptive, right? With binaural, a lot of people hear binaural, they don't even know what that is. It's kind of a highbrow term, in terms of, like, remember, there's over a billion people with Apple devices. So it's got to be really straightforward. It's, this discussion is probably with a lot of geeks like myself and like you, who will nerd out on this stuff and just love it, and, put our head down and just listen and tweak and just keep improving every minute of the day. But 99.9% of the world is just going to listen to whatever is in their headphones, and it's got to be easy to understand that, like, okay, well, this isn't stereo, which I've been listening to for however many years, right? 50 years or whatever, and it's not surround sound because I only have two headphone AirPods in. So what is it? And spatial audio is a great descriptor, but it's using what we'll call behind the scenes and what we render as the format binaural.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
So what happens in your car when you're playing, if you just play an Atmos track in your car, is it just default into 2-channel? Because you could select the Atmos tracks and title when you're driving in your car.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother podcast, because now you have how is the audio streaming? Are you Bluetoothing? Are you hard connected? If you're using CarPlay, what's the car doing? Mercedes is actually going to launch, I'm told anyway, I've heard recently that Mercedes is going to launch actual Atmos decoding and playback. Wow. Which is, you think about it, the car is the perfect place. There's two perfect places for this: home theaters / media rooms and the car.
People spend a lot of time in their car.
Well, and you already have all the speakers. So if you can decode it and get all the speakers set up correctly, so you're playing it back as a reference to how it was mixed, which was using, the same amount of speakers or close to it, what an awesome evolution that's going to be. So I'm told Mercedes is going to do it. I'm sure other manufacturers will jump on board. In the DTS days, Gene, and I won't get into a long story about this because I want to stay on our point, but we had the same vision. And there were a couple of car manufacturers that actually made DTS decoders for the car. And man, you had to practically take the whole car apart to get this thing to go in line. But I did it, of course, on a car, and had a lot to do with its development early on, and playback and tweaking the decoder and all that. And it was, just an enormous project. But the playback of it was, when you heard it, it just brought a smile. Like, this is great. And this is just exactly, what I want in my car. All the speakers are there. Of course, it never caught on. It was an add-on, and the car manufacturers didn't implement it. So, it was a great idea. It was niche.
I had the Acura TL Type S 2007, and it had the Elliott Shiner system, which did DVD audio and DTS CDs.
I remember.
And Yeah, it was a weak
almost had me
center.
driving Acura.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it for quite some time. The center channel was a bit weak on it, but they never really pushed the marketing on that. And one thing I've noticed, and this is another topic for another time, many of the cars that are putting the Dolby surround up mixer, back then it was ProLogic 2 Music, they're using the wrong one. They're using the ProLogic 2 Movie mode, and it dumps everything to the center channel for 2-channel music, and it sounds terrible. And I don't understand how they can make that mistake, but I've seen that in so many cars. The only cars that I really liked post-processing on were like the Harman Logic 7 ones. I thought they did a good job for
They
OEM.
do, yeah. They did a great job. And the Levinson system in the Lexuses is awesome.
Yep.
Really,
yeah, I had a
really
Lexus too. I had a Lexus with a Levinson system. It wasn't surround sound. It was virtualized like the
right.
like
But
Logic
didn't they do a
7.
great? Just the purity. You know, they did a really nice job on the DAC, and they kept getting better. You know, every version they kept improving the Levinson. So car audio is a lane that this technology is just going to really flourish in, and I can't wait to see how it evolves. I mean, you look at how fast CarPlay has been evolving. Now we have wireless CarPlay, and it's just going at lightning speed. So I think we're going to see over the next couple of years a lot of true Atmos immersive audio playback in cars, you know, that are properly decoded, and it's going to be awesome.
If we could get through the supply chain issues. I was looking at some BMWs for my wife for like an SUV. You can't even get the Harman system now because they don't have the DACs.
Oh, wow.
They deleted that feature. Yeah.
The supply chains have been a nightmare, as everybody knows. We're all living through it. It's requiring a lot of patience. It's requiring a lot of plan Bs. And hopefully, you know, that's going to change for the better soon. What we have in front of us on this slide is what is the Dolby Up mixer. And so now as we go through this workflow that we're describing tonight, so we had the initial assets as, you know, multi-track, stem, stereo, then we mix it, we listen in all of these different formats, from native multi-channel discrete Atmos to all the way to binaural. And then that gets delivered to the various streaming services. And now we're in our home theater or wherever we're listening, and we've got a Dolby Atmos compatible processor, right? So it could be a dedicated surround preamp, it could be a receiver, it could be a soundbar, etc. And we're now going to talk about, as you asked me to, Gene, you know, how do we get the best sound out of the equipment that we have based on what we hear coming in? Because what we want to share with everybody, and this is from my sitting on, as they say, the other side of the glass, right, where I'm mixing the stuff and listening to the source material, is that everything's different, right? There's no, as much as we want our levels to be the same, and we want uniformity, and we want things to sound consistent, we want our balances to be as close as possible to how our setup is. It's just that's not the way the content is. You know, some of it is, but most of it isn't. So therefore, there has to be a mechanism for each of us to adjust in real time, as quickly and easily as possible, the sound of the decoding and the playback, right? And that's where we have, as one example, you know, the up mixer is something that, you know, is in all of these various processors, and it takes 2-channel coming in, or whatever you're sending into it. Could be 5.1. It doesn't have to just be stereo. It could be whatever you're sending that's not native Atmos, and then it basically up mixes it, fills the other channels with an algorithm that it has, you know, to your system to ideally make it sound better. If you want more activity, we'll say, you know, like especially on a 5.1, like you're watching a 5.1 movie, and even before you look at the incoming signal format on your processor, you just can hear like, okay, this is 5.1, right? It wasn't a big budget movie or whatever, and there's enough kind of going on in the mix that when you use the up mixer, you know, it sounds bigger, you know, and the room gets filled, and it feels a little bit more immersive.
for sure. And 2-channel up mixing is really, if you use the center spread feature in the Dolby up mixer, it preserves your stereo imaging, and then you get the transients will pop into your surrounds and your high channels. It's not like where some of the other up mixes, the DTS Neural X 2-channel up mixer, I don't like because it dumps everything to the center channel. And then the Oro up mixer for 2-channel, it's like all channel stereo. It's like every channel's on all the time. And that's too powerful. I mean, unless you adjust the settings to compensate. I just find that the Dolby up mixer does the best job at actually creating a pseudo discrete immersive surround experience for 2-channel up mixing.
I agree. I found the same thing, and I think that I want to qualify because everybody's listening experiences are unique to their own, moment. I agree with what you just said wholeheartedly, and the context I would put that in is when I want to listen to something that's reference quality. It's as close to the original as possible, but what I'll call quote unquote improved or enhanced. If there's a party, right, and you use all channel stereo, and then everything's rocking, and it's a totally different reason.
Oh, for sure,
right. Yeah. So everything's kind of got its lane. So we have our up mixing. We go to the processor settings, and I think this is where I'd like everyone to really, try to heed some ideas here from what we're discussing, Gene, and apply them to your own setup, because it takes a few minutes to do and some time, but it yields the biggest results.
Sure.
And it pays dividends because you can implement those results over a long period of time, as long as you own the device, the processor. So the first thing is the setup, the initial setup. So before we get to selecting modes or any of the fun stuff in real time, we've got to set up the processor correctly. And there's typically 3 items, and there's a 4th in there that I should have put, which is crossover. But we'll go through the 4. So you have volume, which is the levels of each speaker, and you can use your phone if that's the only thing you have as an SPL meter. There are SPL meters that you can download, and then from there, set it to slow, C weighted with a slow response, and set it to like 75 or 80 dB, depending on the size of your room and the capability of the system. I typically use between 75 and 85, and then dial in all the speakers and look at the levels and match them. And then the next thing you would do would be the distances, and of course the crossover. Typically I set up the crossover first, and then I do the levels, and then I do the distances. And then lastly, if you have really good room correction, because some of the room correction doesn't sound very good, so you're actually not benefiting much. If your room correction, regardless of how good or bad it sounds, has a bypass option, then it doesn't hurt to do the room correction and then do a bypass and listen to whether you think it sounds better or not, right? But as you get into the really high-end room correction, like Room Perfect, you can get some pretty good results, and or Trinov, have great room correction, and so you can get great results and then implement those, and now your setup is ready to playback, right? We've created essentially, let's call it a reference system. So it plays back, you listen to content, and some movies, the surrounds are too light for your tastes. Other movies, the surrounds sound perfect. Maybe some movies, the surrounds sound a little loud. Same with the center channel, etc. What most processors can do is have settings on the fly where you can recall these level changes and EQ changes even, right? And in the past, I think what's important to kind of debunk here is that in the past, you had, for a long time, let's say the 90s as a point of reference, you'd buy a receiver or processor and there'd be these modes, and they were called classical, chamber, rock and roll, theater,
German bathtub,
and they didn't make it sound better. You know, if anything, they made it sound a lot worse. And they
Yeah.
were artificial, synthesized, you know, basic reverbs or delays or a combination of the two. And so that's not what we're referring to. What's occurred in this evolution of processors and what you have now is typically some really good, what we'll call placeholders, these modes that you can edit. And you can have one, you know, like if we're talking about my setup, right? David Frangioni, I'll have movies, DF. I'll have, you know, action movies, DF. I'll name them and save the, you know, the settings, and they will adjust and compensate in real time for what I'm not hearing in the original mix that I want to hear in my room at that time, including a stereo reference quality that bypasses everything, just entirely flat. I just want to hear what's on the recording. Same thing with just a straight Atmos mix. I want to hear how they mixed it, hear it back, and then from there, you know, make any adjustments that the content is compelling me to want to change.
Yeah, and then you could do like Dan and Marantz has different speaker presets. So if you have 2 money seats, if you've got 2 rows and you get stuck in the back row because you have guests over, they don't need to know that you switch the preset, so it's all balanced for you.
Right. That's right.
That's
And that's a great point. And that's what we're talking about here tonight is like get into these presets and utilize them. Right. That's if you wanted the bottom line, everything we just said, that's the bottom line. Go in, use them. You don't need a lot of them. You know, I think it gets confusing if you have more than 2 or 3 or 4 even.
Yeah.
You know, at some point you just want to listen and watch content. You know, you don't want to sit there and be confused over what's this or what's that. You just, you know, and generally, if you do the setup we talked about and that's in place, that's going to be at least half the content or more. Could even be a much higher number than that. So right off the bat, before you change anything and just do what most processors are called like a pass-through or neutral, you know, you're already there. You just play the content, decodes it, you listen to it, great. Then for that amount of content, whether it's music or movies, that just isn't doing it for your, you know, for what you're hearing, then you have a couple of presets, and it generally changes the balances. And as you said, even as sophisticated as you know, listener locations, and then that's it. From there, enjoy.
I think the 2 common complaints I often hear when people are listening to movies, more than music, the center channel, you can't hear the dialogue good enough. There's mixes of movies where that's true. Like they just screwed up the mix. You could barely hear the dialogue. And in those cases, on the fly channel trim adjustments to boost the center channel is a good solution.
Yeah.
And
No
then
Time
the
to
other,
Die. Did you hear
yeah,
the end of No Time to Die when Remy is it's the whole point of the movie. He's giving a dialogue to Bond before the movie is almost over. And I won't say any more specifics. I don't want to give it away for anyone who hasn't seen it. But I can tell you that the dialogue is so muddled and soft. And that's a huge budget movie and well mixed, you know, great sounding movie. But the dialogue there, you know, you have to either use the subtitles or boost that center channel or both.
Yeah. Well, The Dark Knight Rises is one I always remember because when I saw it in the theatrical mix, I couldn't hear what the hell Bane was saying. Like most of the movie, it was muffled. They remixed it. They did something to the Blu-ray mix because he's clear as day in the Blu-ray, and
Yeah.
it comes like right at you, right at the center, and it was like major difference. So I'm glad when they do post-processing on the Blu-ray discs and they fix a bad mix that was done in the movies. But the other complaint I hear from some people is they put an Atmos disc on or usually streaming. And I think this is a whole nother topic because I think sometimes streaming doesn't give you as good of a quality as you get on the Blu-ray, not just because of the true HD versus the Dolby Digital Plus. I think they might just be cutting corners with Netflix or whoever's streaming the source. You don't get a lot of height information. And in some cases, there's almost nothing playing in the heights other than music. And people get pissed at that. They're like, well, what do I do now? Do I just listen to it in 5.1? Do I upmix it with an upmixer? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because I don't hear that with Atmos music. I hear a lot of stuff going on with almost every Atmos mix in music. And maybe it's because the people that are mixing music care more about creating an immersive object-based experience than the people that are making the movies.
Well, I also think it's compatibility as well. Your evaluation of the streaming not being as good as the disc, in a lot of cases, that's actually true. The streaming is at a lower bit rate, right? So there's just less information. Now, Kaleidoscape, which is a high-end solution, admittedly, but they solved that, right? Because they're bit for bit. And they can actually, because it's download and they don't have the physical disc limitation, they can actually exceed what a disc can contain. So you could actually even get a higher quality version than anywhere else in some titles. But generally, the mainstream streaming is a lower throughput than the disc equivalent, and the disc equivalent will be a better quality experience. And then as far as what channels are being used, you have it's all based on compatibility. When you look at the theatrical mixes, and they're mixing for dozens of channels that are physically installed in a theater, right? And as we talked about our last podcast, you have the Bel Air circuit, as it's called, which are first run movies in an executive's home. That's a 916, and so it's not as much as the theater, but more than what consumer. And then you go to consumer, and it's typically 712 or 714. And so that's just, we're only going to play back as many channels as were mixed at the source. So if we get a 714 decode, then that's all that natively will play. And then from there, we've got to use the up mixer or whatever processing is available, in our system, and extract to the other channels that our processor is saying, okay, we've got more channels to play back than the incoming signal contains. So we're going to extract and we're going to synthesize, these extra channels.
Right. What would you say the default is on movie mixes that are on Blu-ray in Atmos? So is it 714, or do you think it goes beyond that?
No, it's typically 714. I mean, that's just Atmos in general, even if it's not Blu-ray, even if it's streaming, whether it's Apple TV or Roku or Kaleidoscape, or, they're all.
So are the wides native? Because I've seen, I've got Unbroken by Angelina Jolie, and I see wide channel light up on my processor. Isn't that
well?
native?
Look at the incoming signal. If it says 916, then or 914, or 912, then it's native.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, that's something I want to kind of look at more. I find it fascinating that only 10 years ago we couldn't get more than 5.1. We all had 7.1, and we were doing derived 7.1, right? We were using the ProLogic.
Well, we had a little bit of discrete true HD 7.1, right? Like Good Day, Die Hard, right? That was a true 7.1 HD. There were a few, but it never really what we'll call caught on. It kind of went from 5.1 and then kind of limped along 7.1 and then went to Atmos. And then, boom, we had, a really next generation format, I think around 2013-ish. And now, it's being brought into, the immersive audio music world, and it's revolutionary. This isn't a little thing, there's been a lot of significant technologies that, as far as acceptance, were not significant. They were little, DSD. I mean, I have a Super Audio CD player. I love the format, but you can't say that was a mainstream format. I mean, it's just, kind of stayed within our circle of audiophiles. But this is a different story. This is kind of, we get to eat, we get our cake and we get to eat it too, because we have this, really powerful format, and we've got a lot of mixing going on to create content, and we've got the big guys behind it. You've got Apple and all of their devices, and Apple Music, and you got Amazon, you got Tidal. I mean, it's awesome, and it's just going to grow from here.
So let me ask you a question from a creator's perspective. An artist, for example, an Ariana Grande or The Weeknd or any of these modern, Lady Gaga, are they recording the music differently now in the last 6 months because of the Atmos spatial audio? or is it they're just taking the tracks and they're deriving these mixes like you were talking about before? Are they doing things different as a result of this? Is it that impactful?
They are doing things different, and it's not that they're recording different. And I'm not trying to be technical and and nitpick, but it's not that they're recording different; they're producing different, which is the same thing. To your point, it's like they're actually thinking about the the end result differently, because now they can say, oh, like way back, before long before I was mixing, and I talked to guys like Alan Parsons and the Pioneers, and they would say, we did these little tweaks. Steven Tyler actually, would say that to me all the time. We did these little tweaks for the guys in headphones, because before Apple, headphones were a novelty, right? That was like the, here, you put a set of headphones on, it was like a whole different mix. Now that's the de facto norm, and listening on multi-channel speakers is more of a novelty. But, that there was a conscious effort on the part of creators to put all these little nuggets in for people, that when they were listening in a certain setup. And that's happening again now, which also is making this really, really exciting.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I come in my theater room and I'm about to put on one of my Blu-rays or something, and then I just put on Apple Music and I'm like, I don't feel like putting a disc in anymore, man. There's just so much. I put on Christmas music the other day, and there's a whole spatial audio playlist of Christmas music.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Like 4 hours. Gene, it was playing for 4 hours.
It's a great time to be a fan. Our equipment has in our rooms, and the dedication that we've all had in our lives as audiophiles and as enthusiasts, it's never paid better dividends, and it's only going to get better and better and better. Like you said, it's just like, it's almost overwhelming if you let it be, to how much content and how many variations and how many, different styles of music and formats, and, but it's all there and it's accessible. I mean, going out and finding the CD that had a specific mix or a specific format, or remember trying to find DVD-A versions of songs. I mean, it was like a whole job in and of itself before you even got to play anything and enjoy it. And then you still had to have the setup and the playback and everything. Now with streaming, you get all the core things right, you get your room right, you get your setup together, and it's just, it's pretty endless what you can listen to.
One thing I'm wondering too is with Apple Music, I use Apple Music a lot as an example, because I actually prefer that over Tidal. I mean, I like them both, but I really do like Apple Music lossless. Do you think we're going to see?
Great.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to see in the near future, because now we have HDMI 2.1, we have the bandwidth, are we going to see lossless versions of Atmos mixes, or is it always going to be relegated to Dolby Digital Plus?
It's a natural evolution. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, it's like everything. As more bandwidth is available, the technologies, can be implemented. So I think it'll keep growing from there. And I think it's a good thing that these sea changes, right, that are occurring are happening over longer periods of time with little tweaks in between. Because as much as an enthusiast and lifelong creator of this as I am, I also want as many people to enjoy it as possible.
Yeah.
And the more niche and the more little tweaks, and we learned this from 3D in the video world, and all these missteps. It's like, let everybody adopt this and use it and experience it and become as passionate about it as we are. And then that just grows consumer interest. That fuels these technological evolutions that benefit all of us. And in the meantime, we get these unprecedented, listening experiences.
Yeah. And I really hope, like what you were saying before, I hope this gets adopted in cars next, because I spend a lot of time driving. Yeah.
It will. We'll do a podcast in the future when I can talk more about some of the stuff that I've been hired to do, but it's coming. I can guarantee it.
Oh, that's awesome. So, I mean, when you listen to I guess the last question I have for you on this is, when you listen to the mixes you've made, which are in lossless, how close is the sound quality in Apple when you're playing it through Apple TV? Is it close? Is it 90%? Is it 95%?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, I always prefer as the truest audiophile playback, and I still have a dedicated transport with external DAC and all the whole setup that you would imagine for the highest quality that I can get. The wave file, uncompressed, directly burned out of the computer onto a CD or streamed natively on my LAN does sound better, but the lossless sounds very, very good, and it's very close and it's very true. And again, you have to look at it within the boundaries of what's accessible and reasonable. And so to get, it's using FLAC, right? And so it's so much better than, all of the MP3 derivatives that, but to answer your question, yes, it's a lot better, but how close is it to the original? It's very close. A lot of people would only hear the difference A-Bing them, which is what I do to determine that I prefer the WAV files. I'm actually A-Bing them. But if I'm not A-Bing them, it's very high quality and it's great. It's a huge, huge step.
We can't really buy the WAV files, right? Like, I don't really see Atmos music being advertised. I mean, sometimes I find a Blu-ray that's in Atmos music, but it's rare. Like, if you're an audiophile, how do you get the lossless versions of these mixes?
Well, there's that high def website, right? That you download.
Isn't that only 2-channel though?
Yeah, 2-channel.
No, I'm talking about Atmos. How do I get lossless Atmos?
I haven't seen it for sale.
Yeah, me
I haven't seen lossless Atmos. And remember, Atmos, just the whole way the format works is it's rendering, it's storing, and then it's playing back. Now, to get that full resolution lossless, it's coming.
Wow, that's awesome. So one thing I wanted to ask one last thing about when you're on Apple TV or whatever you're streaming Atmos music. The one pet peeve I have is if I have an Atmos track on and then Apple goes to the next song and it's not in Atmos, I get blasted out of my room if it's a 2-channel. Are they going to work on normalizing the levels here? Because there's about a 10 or 15 dB difference between Atmos and 2-channel music.
That's a great question. And you're right, there is. They're normalizing it. I can tell you behind the scenes, it's very strict when we deliver mixes that the levels are within a certain range. And that is softer than a 2-channel traditional stereo mix. But they're all the same. So the Atmos stuff is regulated. The stereo stuff isn't.
Yeah.
So you can, if you're mastering stereo, you can master it as loud as you want, or soft as you want. And it doesn't get kicked back, so to speak. But Atmos has very strict, level ranges that you have to adhere to, or your mix will not be heard. It won't actually go into the formats. It gets kicked back. And, they tell you up front, here's what you have to mix within. Here are your ranges. Here's, what's considered clipping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very detailed specification that you follow. And then, that's why all the Atmos mixes have that consistency.
And I'll give them some credit because when it first came out on Tidal Music, before Apple even had it, there was about a 20 dB difference in level between the Atmos mixes and CD or 2-channel. And I would literally get blown out of my seat. I'd have to run to the couch to grab the remote and lower it because it switched to a 2-channel. So I think they're making some strides there, but I think there's some more work on that. Again,
and you'll want to adjust in your processor, to compensate for that. You'll want a 2-channel, mode that has the level adjust that you can immediately switch to when it, when the source jumps in gain like that.
Yeah. So we got a super chat here I want to share with you. How do we get Atmos movie mixes to stop using channel-based audio so my processor and extra speakers above 7-bed will render movie sounds better? This is what we were talking about before.
So Joe is saying, how do we use more object-based mixing?
Yes.
Instead of discrete? I mean, that's just all in the, that's the movie mixers don't have an excuse because they're really mixed to play back on a multi-channel setup. And so, us music guys, because I do some movies, but I primarily do music. I've got a mix for 5.1, for binaural, for 7.1, for all these formats, and it's a lot trickier. And if you get overzealous with objects, you can really wreak havoc on the binaural. And now you have 80% of your listeners listening to a mix that you don't even like because they're only listening on headphones, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to get it. You got to make sure that headphone mix is really compelling. So as we talked about earlier, there's a balance to it, and there's a technique and strategy to it. With movies, they're really it's all about the multi-speaker setup. And if you only have a TV with stereo, or you don't have a sound bar or whatever, then you just get whatever the down mix is doing, and they mix for it, but they don't prioritize it the way we have to in music. So bottom line is, I think that they've been mixing Atmos for home for quite some time, and I think that they'll just keep getting better and better and better at using the 128 objects that we have, the channels that we have that can contain all this object-based mixing, more and more. So it's all in the hands of the mixer. This is a creative process that has creative license, if you will, that's going to change from every person that mixes.
And it's also important to note that you don't need to have sounds in every speaker all the time. I mean, this was the same argument in 5.1. People said, I can't hear my surrounds. And then the installer would go and put it in all channel stereo just to make the uninitiated happy. Someone that's
well,
not
people
used to
still say that, a lot of people still want the surrounds jacked up. They just enjoy all the time, not hearing what it was mixed like, but hearing, that energy of having those sounds really exaggerated. It's still, I still have clients that, that's what they prefer. So, I always start with reference and then deliver whatever it is that how they want to hear it.
So do you think we're going to see updates to the codecs, like the Dolby Surround Up Mixer? I heard rumors that they're doing a new release on it. Is that in your circles as well? Do you know anything about that?
Oh yeah, the renderer's always being updated. This is a really exciting format. It's got a lot of power behind it. You've got Apple, you've got Dolby. It doesn't get any bigger. And so, it's going to keep growing. We're going to keep seeing improvements, and give us a lot to talk about, Gene.
Yeah, I'm looking forward. I mean, Dolby's made incredible market penetration. Obviously, they're the default standard now. I mean, they're the default streaming standard. They're the default on HD or UHD Blu-ray. For a while, I kind of thought DTS was the main squeeze. It was on regular Blu-ray, but when Atmos came out, Atmos just level set everything.
Yeah, you're right. They really, they leapfrogged the whole race at that point and got out front. And now with Apple and everybody adopting it, it's that's the format, that's the standard right now. And but it sounds really good.
I think when Apple got on board, that was the game changer. I mean, that was like, holy shit, this is mainstream now. Yeah,
no, exactly, without a doubt. No, everything changed in June of 2021, and there's no looking back. And look, I was involved with early DTS, and when you listen to DTS at the higher bit rate, and at the higher bit rate and bit stream, 20 bit, right? 20 bit, 1.5 meg. Versus Dolby Digital at the time. But now we're in the mid 90s now, right?
Yep.
And you listen to 400K versus 1400K a second, and 20 bit versus 16 bit, et cetera, et cetera. There was a really compelling reason to want DTS for some things and Dolby Digital for others, and the two formats coexisted to the benefit of us, of the consumers. And now it's less so, just because Atmos has been adopted. And so, it's great to still have DTS:X and have what they're doing with their upmixing. There's
I
it's
hope they
great.
fix. I hope
But
they fix their up mixer though. I really back in the day, DTS had a music mode and a cinema mode, and he had all the adjustability. Now they dumbed it down to have no settings.
yeah,
And
those
I
were
used to
great
love.
up mixers in the day. You're right.
I'll be honest
Back
with you, the Dolby surround up, the Dolby Pro Logic 2X up mixer and the DTS X up or the DTS New York, I don't even remember the name of it now, music mode and cinema mode. That era before immersive surround for up
Neo.
mixing just
It was
Neo.
Neo.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Their 5.1 up mixes were better than this generation of up mixes if you don't have high channels. If you
I
just have
agree.
a 5,
I
yeah,
agree.
and they need to get back to that. Give
Yeah.
If you're buying a $30,000 processor, give us this ability to adjust it. Doesn't have to be on a $500 receiver, but give us that adjustability back.
Yeah, and a lot more 30K.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. And yeah, it's interesting how there's so many things that go on behind the scenes with executives changing, and it trickles down to the engineers and sales and marketing, and it's like it's a lot that goes into the whole equation before the consumer sees a change either for better or for worse. But it's Dolby Atmos, for anybody who hasn't checked it out and started to jump into it, now's the time.
Definitely. So before I let you go, I want to ask you what are 3 really good Atmos music mixes that you would recommend people start listening to, or as a demo to get a good taste of Atmos that's streaming?
Well, I'm going to make it really, really simple since you said start listening to. And this is, I'm going to ask people to listen to the Beatles because you've heard it a million times and the stereo versions are still up there. So you have your, age old reference, and then listen to what Giles did compared to that. And that's how you get your feet wet. You'll listen to some of the most amazing music ever created, and you'll have a really strong reference point to hear the differences and to hear what was done. And you're going to hear there's going to be like it's a huge difference, but it's a huge difference because of all the nuances, right? So it's not just about stuff flying around and like what you typically think of in a movie mix that's exciting. And Raza, you're absolutely right. It certainly is. So is in Sergeant Pepper, and on and on. So you got to listen to that's my recommendation. Let's start there, and then the next podcast we'll keep graduating.
Sure.
And eventually we'll get to even a more vast library.
Got one more super chat, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Okay.
My height, bookshelf size are positioned in more of an Oro 3D setup at 35 degrees above the mains. Do I lose anything? Most playback is Atmos for me. So this goes back to that question where should you put height channels or should you put in-ceiling tops? David, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but generally if you're setting up for Atmos, I prefer tops because they're closer to the listening area. And I prefer to have that sound coming from above me showering down. That's not to say that height channels don't work. And I'm not telling people to go drill holes in their ceilings if they already have speakers up there for the heights. But generally speaking, I think that the tops is a better solution for Atmos. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it depends on the room. I think if we're talking generally, as you are, I agree. I think that it's really room dependent because I've created rooms with great results and success that use up firing, use front firing like bookshelf that Chris is referring to, and ceiling. And the reason it's different in any of those 3 scenarios is based on the room, the seating position, the number of rows, et cetera, the client goals. But if you were to go for a one size fits all, I would, in order of that priority, I would say ceiling, firing down, as you said. I would then, number 2 would be up firing, Atmos, quote unquote Atmos speakers, as they call them.
Second
and then
gen.
thirdly, pardon?
Second generation Atmos up firing because the first ones were
right,
really
as we talked about last time, second gen, not just this little horn tweeter thing. And then third choice would be the bookshelf. But that's just talking in one size fits all terminology.
Sure.
The context really matters, you know. And that's what I hope everybody takes away from this is that, you know, take this education we're describing and this data, and then apply it to your specific needs and listening environment, because every one of them is unique. Even if someone owns the exact same equipment as someone else, I guarantee you that the room is different, and so it's going to be different. So every system is unique, and so, you know, you got to
look at the end of the day, if you could even implement any kind of height speakers and have a different separation of layers, you're winning the game.
Yes, 100% heights for sure. You know, at the very least, you should have two. And that's going to, you know, make a big difference. And in that case, if it's only two, then ceiling, you know, I would say almost across the board, across the board, you go ceiling, and you get them between the fronts and the sides. And you find that balance, and at least you'll have your front sound stage, and it will give that, it'll give you the sensation that you want to hear, like the rain coming down, and, you know, all those kinds of effects that are very pronounced in the mixing process, two height channels. But it also delineates the sides and the backs if you only have two. Now, if you can get the four, which is optimal, then, you know, you place the two, as we talked about last time, between the front and the sides, and then the other two between the sides and the backs. And at that point, and again, I would go in ceiling for most cases. And then, you know, you really, you know, that's immersive, like at its fully, you know, realized, you know, playback.
Awesome. Well, we could do more of this kind of speaker positioning thing in future podcasts or YouTube live streams if people really give us some comments down below and they have questions.
The
David,
more questions, the better, man. The more, you know, this is what we're here for. You know, it's really about helping anyone that wants to help to, you know, just get better sound. And we're all working together, and we're all learning together. You know, there isn't a system I design, and I'm designing world-class systems on a literal, or mixing world-class music literally every day. And in that experience, whether it's mixing or designing or both, I'm learning. And you're always learning. And then what you learn, you just, you know, gets input into the next and the next and the next, and you just keep growing, and it just expands your vocabulary. And so, you know, we're all learning together and sharing, and that's what makes it great.
Look, I did something crazy that I didn't think would work. You know, a bunch of people kind of thought it wouldn't work, but I wanted to have wides, and I didn't want to put them on the floor because most rooms are not wide enough, and then you're going to be bumping into speakers. So I pre-wired for wides on the floor, but I stuck two in-ceiling speakers further apart than my mains, and almost to the side walls in front of the speakers, and I have them on a 30-degree angle baffle, the in-ceiling was, and they fire at the front of this front row.
Nice. How's it sound?
They sound freaking great as wides. I switched between height and wides, and I actually prefer them set as wides. Now, according to a Dolby diagram, they don't recommend that, but you know what? It pulls off.
Right. And that's a great example of how you need to experiment. The diagrams are there to have a starting point. You know, it doesn't make sense not to have a diagram, because then how does anybody even know what we're talking about, right? You got to have starting points, reference material, we'll call it, but they're not the end all be all. They're the starting point. And then from there, now we have a discussion. And you know what? A lot of times from that discussion, we're hacking up and changing and rearranging everything on the diagram. But without the diagram, how would you even know how to change anything, right? You got to have that tangible starting point. So these recommendations and diagrams and room layouts and et cetera, I think Dolby's done a great job producing them and bringing them to the public as starting points. And then everybody's room is going to have a variation of that to some extent. And what you're describing, you know, is a great revelation to be able to, you know, implement wides that way and hear that that's really a much better experience than, you know, than what you would have thought if you just went by the diagram.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, that's why I always encourage people, like you said, use the diagrams, not as a biblical source, as a starting point, and then conform to what fits in your room and what your wife will allow you to put in your room, which is often dictated right there. But yeah, so David,
we need
again, I
standards,
appreciate
right?
you.
You got to have standards.
You got to have standards. Yeah.
And then from there, we grow.
Yes. I can't stress how much I appreciate you coming on our channel, taking this amount of time. It's awesome to have someone like you give your experience here. Not only are you a pro installer, but you're actually a content producer. So you're on both sides of the spectrum, exactly what we need on this channel. Appreciate you adding this awesome information for our viewers. And we definitely have to have you on regularly. That's kind of the goal.
Well, thank you. You know, I'm very grateful that you've asked me to appear, you know, on a consistent basis and share. You know, I'm going to keep doing it because, you know, that's how we keep this thing growing, you know, keep the formats and the passion for audio evolving. You know, it's a ground game, right? Where all of us just our shared passions just make everything better, and our knowledge and our implementation of such better. So thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, and look forward to next time, and Happy New Year.
Awesome. Yeah. Hopefully, yeah, probably not going to see you till next year. So I guess I'll say I'll see you next year.
Yeah,
guys,
22. We'll be back.
Awesome. Yep. Guys, don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to us. If you want to suggest video topics, you can send me some messages as a patron saying, hey, I'd like to see David cover XYZ. I'll bring it up with David, and maybe we'll do a whole presentation just on that. That's what's awesome about Audioholics. We have all these pros coming to help us create this content for your benefit.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, my friends, keep listening and have a happy new year.